In deze aflevering van de Keuringsdienst van Waarheid ben ik in gesprek met een onafhankelijke onderzoeksjournalist uit Cardiff in Wales. En het is een bijzondere man die tot bijzondere ontdekkingen is gekomen. It's a great pleasure and a huge honor for me to speak to you, Mr. Johnny Vedmore.
Hello, how are you? It's a great pleasure for me to speaking, especially to a continental European audience of any type, because I know that you guys have a bit of trouble with the information due to, of course, different languages and different cultures and etc. and the way they rule things. So it's really nice to be getting out to an audience that isn't American and British.
The reason I invited you for this interview, conversation, whatever you want to call it, because I saw you on a podcast on YouTube with Generation Z. Up until 2 years ago, I had never heard of the World Economic Forum, let alone of Klaus Schwab. I had no clue who the man was or what that whole organization was all about. That has changed by now. I have been wondering for the last 2 years who this Schwab figure was and where this World Economic Forum ID came from. And may I say that you more or less figured it out?
Yeah. I went on a journey that started probably late 2020, about December 2020, where it was pretty obvious and pretty clear that I had the ability and the skills to go hunting for people who didn't want to be found and for information that didn't want to be found. I had dedicated the previous 5 years to that, to actually putting things down on paper and writing things. But before that, I had been interested in family histories and heritage and tribal history, ancient history. All of the past was inspiring to me. So I always liked going there, and it became clear that we were concentrating at Unlimited Hangout. Me and Whitney Webb were concentrating on a couple of different areas, but one of the obvious focuses we were paying attention to was World Economic Forum, what they were doing, who they were, and where it was going, because I think lots of people saw it as a major think tank policy institute for years and years and years, just accepted it as a kind of place where people who hobnob with the rich and famous, kind of like another G8 summit that would happen every year or something, but for the businesses and for the marketers. And no one really, I don't think anybody really believed, because it looks so... It looks so much like the James Bond vision of evil in the Swiss Alps with a bald leader who talks slowly in a German accent and scares everybody a little bit. That seemed like a bit too obvious for it to be true. But of course, the point was that no one knew about Schwab. No one knew about his ancestry. No one knew about his family history. And what was out there were Reddit articles. There was I found a PDF that was really big and in depth after I'd already published the article, which I'm glad I didn't find it before, because it was full of wrong, erroneous information. Okay. And even though that they had done a fairly good job of rounding certain things off, they had completely and utterly gone fantastical and imaginary and created a story that was more like a movie than it was the actual facts about Schwab's life. But when I looked for anything originally, I couldn't find anything. That actual piece, that PDF document was published a month after I had produced the article, and I think I might have peed people off and made them want to, quickly, we've been doing all of this work, we better put it out as well. And the regret of not making sure that you get an article right is something that I don't want to live with. I've been taught by watching other writers and other researchers for years, people like James Corbett, and of course Whitney Webb, who I'm now honoured to write for Unlimited Hangout. I've been watching these writers bossing the scene, and they've been teaching people like me something very important from the off, which is make sure that when you write an article, it's completely sourced, every single fact is correct, that you've double, triple checked everything, you have multiple points of reference for any claim that you're making. they taught us how to be actual journalists.
Yeah.
They taught us how
I was about to make a joke and say that because that is the way you work, you will never get a job at mainstream media. But
yeah, well, I already learned that because they do ignore all of my work. However, I mean, just before I won't get off track, but just before Theresa May was elected in 2017, I produced an article that showed that Theresa May's father had worked closely with a serial killer called John Buchan Adams, who killed over 130 people. It got 250,000 views in a week, like reads in a week, which is amazing for someone who I had no sort of recognition on any type of stage, and not one mainstream outlet mentioned it at all, even though it was the most juicy story you could possibly find as you're coming up to the election. And I had lots of points like that which said to me, well, obviously they don't want to find out the family history of the rich and famous, and there's a reason.
This was in 2017, you said?
Yeah. So I started really trying to be a professional writer, making professional articles that were sourced and were that I made sure were completely perfect from about 2016, and that has led me to the point where it was obvious that I should look into Schwab. And so I spent 5 weeks in Chile researching, given the space to research just constantly day and night. And it really was day and night. It took me 5 weeks to find out who his father was, with enough points of reference to say that is definitely his father, especially one piece of information, which is I think it's the second link in the first document, which was the first article, which was called Schwab Family Values. Basically, let me give you a rundown of who Klaus Schwab's family is, because his father is a man called Eugen Schwab. Eugen Schwab was born to Jakob Wilhelm Gottfried Schwab. Gottfried Schwab, as he was called, was a man who had given up his German citizenship at one point to move to Switzerland and get married, and he had a baby, Eugen Schwab, and they would move back to Germany, and Germany would say, well, you can only have your citizenship back if you promise never to give up your citizenship again. So that's why nowadays Schwab's not allowed to be a Swiss citizen. If you type that in online, you'll discover Klaus Schwab isn't allowed to be a Swiss citizen. That's basically because of that era when they tried to swap nationalities. And of course, so they took back their German citizenship just at the turn of about 1898. And at that time, there was already a factory that was quite big in the area they lived in, Ravensburg, and it was this is in Baden-Württemberg, which is Wittenberg, which is in Oberschwabia, which is of Schwabs, and that's in the south west of Germany, that is on the border with Switzerland. And Ravensburg had this factory that would basically take over the entire town. It would be the main place to find work in the town. And it made machinery at the start in the 1860s. It was set up by Walter Zuppinger. And Walter Zuppinger would make machines that would make lace and things like that. And then eventually, by the time Eugen Schwab was being born and the turn of the century, Escher Weiss factory in Ravensburg were focused really heavily on major projects like turbines, massive turbines, hydroelectric dam projects, things that no other factory were producing, that were high tech at the time, of course. So these include lots of things for ships, big turbines for ships as well. And they become a business that was too big to fail, too important to fail. If they didn't exist anymore, then no one would have these massive turbines, and there was still loads of money in it. So the company kept running at a loss, and I kept going into money trouble. By 1920s, when Eugen Schwab is in his 20s as well, and there's all that trouble going on in Germany, Escher Weiss basically collapses and it has to get saved. And then the same thing happens again in the early 1930s. It collapses again and has to be saved. Now, its original parent company is over the border in Switzerland. So Escher Weiss is officially a Swiss company with a Ravensburg branch in Germany. And when it comes to the 1930s, a Swiss colonel called Jacob Schmidheiny would lead the takeover of Escher Weiss, and they would basically say, we can't let it fail. We're going to take over, but it will be with a mixture between, in a sense, what we could say private-public partnership, and the Swiss government would be in control of it somewhat. Now, this was leading up to World War, of course, and Eugen Schwab, by this point in the early 30s, was already the manager of the Escher Weiss factory in Ravensburg. So he was the manager entire of the factory. So the main man, the big dude at the top. And they weren't only concentrating on making hydroelectric dam turbines, they were also helping the Nazis eventually with a project. Because you see, Ravensburg, when it came to 1938 and Klaus Schwab is born, to Eugen Schwab, who had been married before, and that lady also in 1938 was Jewish and would emigrate to America and say she was Hebrew when she arrived there. So obviously that was a marriage that had ended years, like a decade before. He'd already remarried and then had Klaus Schwab and his brother a little bit later during the war years. So he's managing this factory, and its main focus is producing turbines for the Nazi atomic bomb project. A couple of years before the war, it was given the title Model Nazi Company, Escher Weiss, this Ravensburg factory. It was in a book where there were multiple companies who were seen as model Nazi companies that took Nazi ideals and pushed them forward. Of course, we all know what was happening during the war, especially those in Europe. We've been brought up with it, so we know kind of what that means. You're down with everything that's negative about the sort of like the Nazi takeover, and he very much was, because they were at the centre. Ravensburg got special dispensation at that time to not be bombed by the Allied forces when the war happened. So this area where this atomic bomb research was going on, where they were putting up the turbines, sending the turbines up to Norway. Go on.
Hang on. Did I hear correct? Was there some sort of deal with the Allies?
Yes.
That this region would not be bombed?
Ravensburg specifically, where the larger sprawling factory that was making the turbines for the heavy.
Why was that deal made?
Because the Red Cross. I mean, the Red Cross are so suspicious. If you look at all of their history, they basically go in and they're used by in this case, the Swiss government, to give some form of protection over an entity that they was linked with the Swiss government themselves. And later on, after the war, the Swiss the people wouldn't do business with the Swiss for a long time after they found out how much they had worked with the Nazis. There was a lot of mistrust in the whole of Europe about the Swiss behavior, and that kind of died off at the end of this millennium. But Eugene, obviously we know what happened. They tried to use heavy water to make an atomic bomb, but the Americans got there first. And they, of course, the Americans dropped bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And the British actually had requested them not to drop bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and instead gas the entirety of Tokyo. That's what the British wanted to do. Secretly.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I wrote about that in a thing called The Ideological Clouds of Brought Them Down, which is about their experimentation. But the Americans said, no, that sounds too cruel. Instead, we're going to obliterate to a main population hubs completely. So when they had failed, Eugen Schwab became a man who, of course, must have been of interest to the Allied forces after the war. We all know the Germans didn't succeed in their plot, but he was central. And I am hearing word, I'm yet to see the evidence, that there is evidence that the Americans were looking at him. And we all know about things like Operation Paperclip, but I can only assume on those cases. But by any case, Klaus Schwab's growing up through the post-war era. And when he gets up to the point where he's got loads of qualifications, he goes to different universities, Zurich ETH and other places, and he picks up degree after degree. He's given award after award. And in 1964, his father says to him, Klaus, if you really want to succeed, you've got to go to Harvard. And at the time, Harvard was the center of the thermonuclear debate, deterrence debate, how to stop thermonuclear war, but also what to do to create thermonuclear war. Lots of weird things were happening. Yeah. And of course, it was a base where there were people like Henry Kissinger, who in the late 50s, had made himself central to the thermonuclear war debate by producing Thermonuclear War and Foreign Policy. And his first paper that he wrote that came out from his CFR working group, his first paper invoked thermonuclear war in its first line. So he was very focused on that. So he had put himself in a position where he'd become one of the experts on thermonuclear war. I will talk about one of the other experts later. So Klaus Schwab would be going to Harvard with this idea, pushed along by his father. This is going to be the central place, but he wouldn't attend a course. Klaus Schwab says this himself, and that caused me trouble. I've been researching this whole era because I had written my first article, Schwab Family Values, discovered about all of the nuclear bomb stuff, the atomic bomb stuff, but also discovered that in 1967, Klaus Schwab had got a phone call from the son of Jacob Schmidt-Heine, who had taken over Escher Weiss under that public-private partnership in the 1930s and had managed the company, directed the company, of course, would have directed Klaus Schwab's father. They would have been close, of course, and their sons were close, because Jacob Schmidt-Heine's son was Peter Schmidt-Heine, and Peter Schmidt-Heine would phone Klaus Schwab in 1967 and say, new management skills, now you've been to Harvard, why don't you come and help with this merger of Escher Weiss, the company his father worked for, the model Nazi company, and Sulzer Group, along with Brown Boveri. And they had these three major companies and a couple other little ones had all decided that they could share where they research and what they research, so that they could they weren't competing anymore and they would all make money. And so they decided to do a merger. And Klaus Schwab would be the main man. He would be put second in charge of the company as a whole, and he would be the main man doing this merger. And at the same time, nearly from the off, they were supplying the South African apartheid regime with nuclear bomb technology for their eventual unsuccessful nuclear bomb program against international law. So Klaus Schwab in 1967 would do the same as his father had done before for a Nazi model company. Not only for the Nazis, but this South African regime was as racist and as evil and as obviously this same entity spiritually that comes from that Nazi regime. And this blew my mind, that then people would say and look at the history and say, and then he started the World Economic Forum, and then would go from there. Because it never made sense how, and then you start the World Economic Forum. Who leaves university, even if you go to Harvard, and suddenly start the World Economic Forum? You have to have a bit of time in between there. You have to have the moment. You have to have the impetus. You have to have the reason. And I could not see the reason. And
was that a trigger for you to try to figure out what happened there in this?
My God, that was a trigger for me to spend the next year researching everything I possibly could all around it, and not knowing what I was trying to find, because I didn't know really what the story was. It was a big gap in the story, and it seemed like a really strange story. And after a year, I came across a certain amount of information. It just opened a massive floodgate, and basically then I just told within the article that you have behind you on the screen, I just wrote down the evidence, and the article wrote itself in very many ways, because the evidence and the truth always tells itself to be what it is. You can't hide away from it. And what was, of course, interesting is that Klaus Schwab...
Very briefly, the article I have here behind me on the screen, I will put a link to that article in the description under the video. Yeah. The title of the article, I think that might need some explanation. Because you write, Dr. Klaus Schwab, or how the CFR taught me to stop worrying and love the bomb.
Yeah.
the CFR. When I saw that CFR, I thought that is case fatality rate, because that's what I've learned the last 2 years. But that's not what it means, does it?
No, indeed. Once upon a time in the world, there was a man who was called Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes lived in the late 1800s and was a very, very successful South African industrialist, mining, all sorts of different things. And he made loads of money, and he was really behind the British Empire. He wanted the British Empire to succeed, and he mapped out the idea of how to do that. And because of the way that he made his money, and it was so much of it, when he died in the early 1900s, I think it was like 1900 on the dot or something, that he died, he would leave a selection of will and testaments to be carried out on his behalf. And the first 6 would remain secret, I think. But the 7th and 8th got leaked out somehow, and something along those lines. Basically, he wanted to create a load of organizations and fund a load of organizations all around the world. Things that sound like called the Royal Institute of this or the Royal Institute of that. And these bases would be round table groups. They would be a selection of groups that kind of work in a. He had in mind, and I don't like saying this because it's got connotations, it's got history, but he saw it as the kind of Adam Weishaupt pyramid. Everything goes down. You've got the person at the top, and you've got the 2 underneath the control head. You know, that was very simplistic. If you look at a pyramid from above, though, it becomes like you can look at it like a round table group. You've got the round table in the middle, the point of the pyramid. And then out from it, you've got multiple round table groups. And these round table groups are really, first, the top layers, we're not even sure who they are or what they're called. You know, they are people who meet, and they have a certain control and a certain interest implanted into the other roundtable groups. So when they make a decision, they put that decision down. Then those roundtable groups are the same. They have multiple roundtable groups, and the lower down you get, the bigger these groups become. And when they become visible, when they start to become visible, apart from the Royal Institute of this and the Royal Institute of that, when they start to become really visible, they're institutes such as the Council on Foreign Relations, which was really a kind of built off a template of Chatham House in the UK, which is like about is the way to control foreign affairs, basically. And the Council on Foreign Relations is a really interesting entity that was created, I think, in about 1922. And it's extremely powerful. I think there's only about 6,000 people who represent it at any one time. It's not like the most. It may be a lot more than that nowadays, but it's not the most that you would think. But nearly every single person in power has been put into power by CFR members in history. When you actually go through the history of the CFR, you discover that every single politician has somehow had someone or selection of people from the CFR, and lots of people accuse the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, as being one of the hidden hands, the true hidden hands behind society. And when you actually read the journal they put out themselves, it's hard not to agree with the voices saying that this is obviously a hidden hand. And they, you know, I learnt about the Council on Foreign Relations very early on in my journalistic career, and I said, I can't do anything with that right now. It's too big and scary. It doesn't make any sense to me. The idea of it seems too much like the Illuminati, and I don't want to tackle that. I'll put it to the side, and eventually I will have enough knowledge about it to be able to understand it more. And this article really helped me get to that point I am now, where I've already learnt loads of the members by just researching other things. It just, when you research the rich and powerful in society in the hidden hand, they're nearly all CFR members. So you end up saying, okay, now you've got a problem. You've got this complete a link, a complete repeated theme happening over and over again. It's obvious what that needs to be investigated. But I didn't have that at first with this article, because I'm just looking for what Klaus Schwab did at Harvard. And what Klaus Schwab did at Harvard was go to an international seminar. And that really confused me because I thought he was supposed to be doing courses over there. But he says, no, I just attended seminars and presentations. And the international seminar was actually set up in the early 1950s by a guy called William Yandell Elliott, an extremely powerful guy who was an advisor to 6 different presidents and was high up in the CFR. William Yandell Elliott would be one of the people who helped push Henry Kissinger to become a member of the CFR in the 1950s. All the working groups about nuclear weapons that Henry Kissinger was involved with and nuclear deterrence during the real major Cold War, dangerous Cold War era, they were all done within the CFR. Henry Kissinger himself had left Harvard in 1951 with his qualification under his belt, his degree. He'd already applied to be an FBI intelligence agent, like a spy, but been refused. And George Bundy, who was one of the heads of the I think he was at that time the head of the School of Government or something at Harvard, he basically said, no, you should definitely be recommended to the CFR. So in 1951, Henry Kissinger went to work for the CFR. And so all of that planning and mapping out their responses to the USSR and to the Soviet threat and the Red Menace, that was all done through a lot of working groups in the CFR, which would then they would order other people to do other things. And there's a lot of Hoover at the time was receiving a load of mail. I don't mention this in the article. It was receiving a load of mail saying, oh my God, who's this CFR? Have you seen them? Are they controlling the world? Who are these? And all worries and all concerns. And they didn't respond to any of them, I don't think. They just ignored it because they knew, of course, what was going on. So Henry Kissinger had all of this experience, and he had been put in charge of this international seminar at Harvard. And this international seminar is extremely interesting because of some of the people who went there. Because Klaus Schwab said he went to the international seminar, I thought I'd look into that. Obviously, that's going to have to be something that I look into. And Klaus Schwab went to Harvard at 1965 and left Harvard in 1967. Well, I discovered the international seminar from 1961 to 1966, reported in 1967, was funded by the CIA through a very known conduit and admitted by Harvard in the end of 1966 and early 1967 that course was funded $146,000 at the time, which you can imagine was a lot of money in the 60s, was funded by the CIA. So, what's this course, I thought, that is funded by the CIA, that's got Henry Kissinger in charge of, that is being created by William Yandell Elliott, this amazing grandiose advisor to 6 presidents, and a guy who everybody should know his name, and no one knows his name. And what is this? I mean, it can really confuse you when you get to something like that. I mean, it seems so big, but it is so simple. A CIA-funded course, and at the same time, the people who were involved with Henry Kissinger and that team were also creating another vision of the world in the future in the Hudson Institute, that was part of Rand Corporation and other things, other entities, headed by a man called Herman Kahn, who's the real Dr. Strangelove, apparently. He says that Stanley Kubrick was a friend of his and he had promised him that Dr. Strangelove wasn't based on him, but everybody knows Herman Kahn as the real Dr. Strangelove, and he was nuts. But I think the Dr. Strangelove character nuclear was actually more like a combination of Fritz Kramer, who was a big American, he had been a German who had switched over to America during the Second World War, was an American hero, and again advisor to a load of presidents, and was over the top war monocle in his eye and spoke in a crazy accent, just like Dr. Strangelove. I think it was a mixture of him, Herman Kahn, and Henry Kissinger. I think like Kubrick had this idea they were the face of nuclear deterrence, because Herman Kahn in the Hudson Institute was just researching nuclear deterrence. They were going through the understanding. They built the understanding. In 1961, he would produce On Thermonuclear War, which would look at the deterrence, what happens during deterrence. What happens? You know, you've got the first bit of nuclear deterrence, which is you've got a bomb, they've got a bomb. So neither of you want to fire bombs at each other. If you've got a sufficient amount of bombs on both sides, no one wants to fire the button on purpose. It might happen by accident or by malpractice, something like that, sabotage, but it's not going to happen on purpose. And they kind of decided that by this period. That seems like a bit obvious. The second part of nuclear deterrence was understanding all of the factors that come from the original standoff. You've got these nuclear weapons on this side and that side. So someone can attack over here, but they can go only a certain way. And like you see in Ukraine at the moment, but they can't go any further because maybe you'll fire a nuclear bomb at them and then they'll have to fire a nuclear bomb. So it manages, you know, you learn how to manage the factors that come from the first standoff. And then the third one is even more complicated because it's the deterrence factors or the things that you can apply to offset the problems that come from the first two factors of deterrence and all the social, and make it unprofitable for the other side to want to fire a nuke or take any aggressive action or respond in any type of way to the first two ideas. It got absurd. By 1961, they understood how absurd it was, and they were having trouble explaining this to anybody anyway, because nuclear deterrence is absurdity. The idea of firing bombs that will be mutual assured destruction is madness. So they didn't really want to do this. No one really wanted to do this, and they had come to that understanding. And 3 years later, Stanley Kubrick would come out with Dr. Strangelove, and was a way to show, I believe, it was a way to show how absurd nuclear war was and the idea of deterrence was. Because I mean, if you look at it, it's like there's a point where there's the American colonel on the base with the British ambassador, and they're hiding in the room, and all the Americans are firing at each other outside, and no one knows what's going on, and it's all madness and crazy. And that really was the absurdity of war, and the idea of the doomsday device that comes up in that movie, which is if anybody fires a nuclear bomb, then the doomsday device will destroy the world. Yeah. So it was a deterrence. It was a kind of like thing based on Tesla's death ray. You know, anybody has a fight or has a war, boom, the world blows up. So that should deter you. But it doesn't deter people from making mistakes or errors or getting psychologically disturbed by the scenarios and by the pressures that are put on by the scenarios. And so from that you see absurdity happen. And so
I need to get back to Herman Kahn.
Yes,
because I think he is a remarkable figure.
He is both. One of the things that happened at this international seminar was Kissinger would introduce Klaus Schwab, the young Klaus Schwab, to two men, John Kenneth Galbraith, who was an economic advisor, policymaker, one of the most boring men in history, professor to JFK in school. Then he worked alongside JFK, was also like helped for his campaign. He got a fabulous history. Herman Kahn's even more interesting because, of course, you can see why an economic professor would end up being involved in Klaus Schwab's world somehow. John Kenneth Galbraith would also be introduced through the international seminar to Klaus Schwab by Henry Kissinger. Go on.
I really want to... I'm going to add a link in the description to that video as well. In your article, there is a 3.5 minute video from the 60s in which Herman Kahn, and I'm not sure with whom he is sitting there at the table.
Anthony J. Weiner, the guy's name is.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And they're sort of predicting the future.
Yes.
And they're scary correct.
They're not only scarily correct, is that halfway through, Herman Kahn just slips in, maybe we should just put something into the water supply, a bit of tranquilizer into the water supply, you know?
Exactly.
Keep everybody under control, keep everybody calm. You know, some of the things...
And the situation they are speaking about there is that if there would be some civil unrest, then they're talking about ways to get the people in the community calm again.
They say some crazy things, but this is...
But they're also speaking about, in the 60s, mind you, they're speaking about we will be able to listen in on all phone conversations, and not with people just listening to them, but by computers.
Yeah.
In the 60s, they're speaking about how computers can just analyze our whole conversations, record them all, store them all. How on earth did they know in the 60s that technique would go so far? So
the analyzing of how rational agents act in certain scenarios is the scientific response, and it's called game theory, and it's about basically working out the basic, and it works along the same lines as the nuclear deterrence. When they had to game out nuclear deterrence, and he had to work out how in the Hudson Institute on thermonuclear war and how deterrence worked, they used game theory to map that out, and it was very successful in predicting how people would act, because basically you get a probability of roughly what everybody's going to do, because if you work it out mathematically, people usually act in a certain way, and certain things happen, and it's pretty easy to work out what the most likely scenarios are to be, and that can be multiple.
Could it be the other way around, Johnny? Could it be that it's not so much predicting how people are going to behave, but it's manipulating how people are? It becomes,
I think that people would say that's a risk, but I think it automatically becomes that. I think that they were trying to understand during that period of trying to understand how deterrence worked, because it was so absurd. It let them see that they could explain a lot of things, and they could see a lot of things with this technique, and that would have an effect on how people act. The knowledge of the future is opening up Pandora's box.
Yeah.
If you are able to work out what the next step is in a really complicated scenario like the dynamics of thermonuclear deterrence, then you can nearly discover anything, and or map out anything to a very accurate probability. And by
which brings me to Herman Kahn again and his scenario for the 21st century.
Yes. So by 1966, Herman Kahn's been taken into the State Department to become an advisor. At that time, John Kenneth Galbraith and Henry Kissinger on the side are both combining together to talk about foreign policy and Europe and focus on Europe. But Herman Kahn's Hudson Institute was tasked with looking at the future and understanding future technology and understanding where we would be in the future. Because everybody realized around in the 60s that the atomic bomb had turned into the nuclear bomb, and that whatever come next was going to cause even more trouble than before. They had to spend 15 years or so mapping out nuclear scenarios to understand what may happen. There's so many technologies that they realized were going to come in the future that would have the same effect as nuclear technology. There would be a game changer, and would mean that one country could take over the entire world if they have that technology. And there's a multitude of those technologies, and they realized they needed to realize them. They needed to make them true. They needed to create them and be there first. So Herman Kahn and his guys at the Hudson Institute would first start researching the year 2000, which was their prediction of where technology would be in the year 2000. And they went too far with most of the year 2000. They predicted way too. They were just too good at predicting the future. Nearly everything they predicted is going to come true or is already true. And their accuracy, by 1967, they would release this document called the year 2000, and people would marvel at it. And of course, it would give a lot of ideas for the people in the future.
There is this list, which you also refer to on your website, where somebody took the trouble of color coding.
I love that person. Yes.
Yeah. And there's a total of, I think, about 135 predictions, if I'm not mistaken.
And they're big predictions. They cover a lot of techno. I mean,
it's 135, and they color coded it. A hit is a green, a partial hit is purple, and a miss is red. And I think most of it is green or purple.
Yeah, and it's still marked as red, but there's things on there that are like, well, that's already been done.
I've looked through this list myself yesterday in preparation of our conversation now.
Yeah.
And there are some things marked as red, which I think in the mainstream narrative is red.
Yes, yes.
But I think you and I would agree on there should be a couple of them should be at least purple, maybe even green.
Yeah, and I think what this list became was, or this document became, was a tick sheet, or was meant to be, not what it became. I think this was meant to be a tick sheet of how to gain those technologies first and have technological supremacy. I mean, that seems to be a very obvious conclusion to make. But what's really interesting is at the same time as that list was being made, they also were making the ancillary document for educational purposes in 1967 at the Hudson Institute. And this would basically map out how they changed society to be able to meet those technological changes and to keep up with that technological change. And that included a project that was already running in the international seminar where Klaus Schwab, Pierre Trudeau, and other world leaders came through.
Pierre Trudeau, would he by any chance be the father of...
and the ex-Prime Minister of Canada, yes, just after he went to this course. Installed, you could say, maybe he was. Well, you make up your own mind. It seems like the international seminar was based off, or was at least a program that was attached to the Hudson Institute ancillary document for education that looked at how to train the leadership group separately from the rest of society from a very young age and groom them to be able to implant us with their idea of common values.
Yeah. So this brings us to the Young Global Leaders Program that Klaus Schwab is so fond about.
Yeah.
And him bragging about having penetrated. He's speaking about the Canadian government, I think, where he speaks about having penetrated the government, and more than half of the government is now a World Economic Forum puppet. Yeah. That's not his words; those are mine.
There's a very interesting thing there as well, because just before, if you watch elongated version of that clip and extra with the extra bit before, he says, for instance, our young global leaders, including we've got Putin in Russia and we've got Merkel, and then he goes on to say about the other ones. And that, I just make a note, by what I've researched so far, I can't confirm this for sure, but there seems to be a first most Russian Patriot program had 3 candidates, was in 1991. One of those candidates was Vladimir Putin, and it was the young global leaders from the World Economic Forum, but for the Russians. So where the Young Global Leaders project started in 1991, 1992, under the title global leaders for tomorrow and would be changed the next year. Lots of people actually who attended the very initial Young Global Leaders say that they were basically ousted and cut out when they asked any questions. So, and then they changed the title. They said, we've closed down the program. We're not doing it anymore. And then the next year they discovered, oh, wait a minute, they've just changed the title and they've started it again under Young Global Leaders. And then they chose very carefully.
The name has been mentioned, Vladimir Putin. Yes. That was one of the things I wrote down because, and we will get back to Klaus Schwab in a moment. This question might need some introduction, so please allow me to elaborate. In the beginning of this year, you saw almost all governments dropping COVID measures. And I think we all felt something is coming, something is going to happen, because they are not just dropping it and throwing the whole plan overboard. Then came February, and Vladimir Putin decided to enter the Ukraine. There are multiple ways of looking at that situation. I've spoken to many people, from youngsters to people in their 80s, and nobody seems to agree on what the situation actually is. I think, this is my opinion, I think that Vladimir Putin is indeed another World Economic Forum puppet, and he's doing exactly what is needed to be done to cause the next chaos in the world, because we can all see it happening. All these measurements against Russia are now leading to food shortages, prices going through the roof. I think we're on the break of the monetary system going down. But then again, there are also people that are saying, no, Vladimir Putin is a bit of hope. He's one of the few people that is actually fighting against this, let's say, dark, what do you call it? The deep state.
Yeah.
So I'm on the pessimistic side of things. What's your opinion?
Right. Well, this is a very interesting situation we're seeing in the world. For me, it was January 4th, and I was waiting for it as well. I knew they love to do new thing at the end of the year, and I remember walking around in the park, and I never put the video up. I've been like, I make a couple of videos every now and again. I just don't put up, but they help me as well think things through as I'm talking and walking and stuff. And I kind of said to myself in this video, yeah, this is a day. January 4th is a day, and it was weird because I went outside and there was air raid sirens going off. In Cardiff, there's never air raid sirens going off. We don't even have tests that often. I didn't even, it was like, okay, I already felt like today was going to be a change in things. And I saw things change in the news nearly instantly. There was this like die down and a change in narrative, a change in the way the people who had been out there on COVID started to drift away really quickly. The news on COVID started to dry up. Anybody who's used YouTube and seen that horrible banner that says COVID news is just a row of propaganda, filthy, became just one video in that time. And I knew January 4th, I felt, okay, this is a changeover. Now, all of this crap has been from COVID to this war has all been for one thing, in my opinion, which is the reset of the economy, the global economy. Yeah. And they're all rushing towards it. I think that the petrodollar, the idea that the petrodollar is going to change over has been something I've heard lots of people say. And I think itself may be a bit of a false flag, because everybody knows that oil and gas is not the future of technology. These guys have already mapped it out. They've mapped it out in ways that we haven't even seen. But if you listen to someone like Jason Bermas, he covers a guy who's part of the establishment who talks about where they are technologically speaking, and we're very close to very free energy. sources, like really small free energy sources. So all of these things like oil and gas and things are things of the past. So the petrodollar isn't going to be worth much in 5 years' time. So they're arguing over something that's really both illusory and ethereal. It's going to disappear in no time whatsoever. So I think the argument is kind of like, it looks really scary, but what we're seeing now is a process of competition to reach the head of this system first, or reach as far as possible to the system first.
A competition between whom?
The globalists. And I think that people like Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, nearly every member of the EU, Britain.
Okay, that's interesting, because that's then an answer to my question. So you do not believe that they're all working together on establishing a new world order?
I think they're competing against each other in something that's seen like a friendly competition between fellow mates. I think they see it as, right, okay, we know that basically whoever gets this going first is going to be in the best state to become the next superpower. Okay. Everybody sees that at the moment we've got a man who potentially wears adult diapers in the White House. There's no chance at all that the American empire is going to continue on if it keeps on in this, and it's fracturing from within, and even within, like, you've got the Silicon Valley elite who is putting up these ideas, oh, let's make smart cities around here and around there, attract people into these smart cities, but we'll have our own rules, and each place will have their own rule. And it's like going back to some sort of like idea of what city-states used to be, but technological city-states, you know. They're looking at things differently. And at the same time, you see China has gone really quickly in advancing the World Economic Forum agenda.
So then my question is, if Putin were not to be cooperating with, let's say, the West, with Europe and America, then why is he doing exactly the right things to benefit Europe and America in achieving their agenda, in achieving their goals, in resetting this economy?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, all of them do the same maths. Whoever comes out on top and gets the system in place first will have extra power within a globalist system. None of them will have the same power that they had before. They all will lose power, but they know they got to fight for that little bit of power extra so that they have a little bit of wriggle room more. They're all trying to get there. Now, in Russia, you've got Sberbank and the head of Sberbank, who's part of the World Economic Forum. They run the cyber polygon stuff, along with Mikhail Mishustin, who was the prime minister of Russia, who presented the World Economic Forum cyber polygon stuff, who were working with Tony Blair and the like, you know. So it's all a big boys club as well. You've got these people who are trying to create a system that's like an app for Sberbank, which will cover everything. It will cover all your bill payments, all your transactions, everything goes through one app, all the money in one system. Now, this centralizes it in just one nation and is awkward for other nations to get round. So it already seems like some of these countries are going in on themselves and saying, we're going to make a closed system just for ourselves. But this, because it's like a tech revolution in the same way, a political tech revolution. They're all trying to create the best system that the other countries will have to adopt eventually. So maybe Sberbank and their plans will be the best possible looking plan to the world agenda once it gets down the line, and everybody will adopt that. Maybe the Chinese model will be the perfect one, and everybody will adopt that. Maybe this one. One of them is going to win out. Now, there's still this idea of national competition that is it seems juxtaposed to what we think of globalists, but globalists have to work in harmony with nations, and so you get a tiny little bit of your input. So I think they do that. They create the competition. So there's a competition between these big major powers, China, Europe, Russia, and America, with America, Britain, Canada, and all basically being the same blob. They're all competing, along with some of the other countries. They're all competing to get there first, introduce a system that everybody else will have to adopt for the globalist system. So it's like, in a sense, you could see it as a competition, a science prize, and the best winner gets to choose what the globalist system looks like and how it runs at the end. So it's like a school competition for all of these nations. And in between, there has to be distraction. And really, if you look at what happened in Ukraine, they may say that they were saying 2 weeks ago, Kiev is about to fall. And if you look, the Russian troops were basically in the same place the Russian troops have been all of the time, because no time did the West take back the Donbass and places. That was always Russian. All of that area was basically, it was slowly leaking out. As they weren't doing anything, slowly Russian influence was leaking out anyway, and they knew it. It was all, I mean, the whole thing was from a Western coup anyway, and there's always been a fight over Ukraine backwards and forwards. And you're not seeing a complete destruction. What you're seeing is a load of journalists who are exaggerating beyond belief what is going on the ground. Because anybody who lived through the 90s would have seen things like the war zones in Kosovo, Srebrenica and stuff. Would have seen old women running across completely derelict buildings with their shopping bags, trying to avoid being shot by snipers. You know, that's war. That's what war looks like. What you see is encampments full of people who are getting shot in the back of the head when you see war that is disgusting. You're not getting, what you're seeing is a very kind of like, it's a sissy war. A sissy war. And no one's going to fire a nuke at each other because they're not that bloody stupid, because they already did the maths 50, 60 years ago. But they're making everybody else who didn't live 50, 60 years ago, you know, the next generation to us who never experienced any of that, who don't even know what Dr. Strangelove is and don't understand the idea of nuclear threat deterrence. They're back to the 1950s and 60s psychologically. They've been forced back to an era which the government is well aware of how they can use the fear to manipulate and control society. And I think it all stinks to them still living off ideas that came from the late 60s, including Herman Cahn's year 2000, where they basically said they have no new ideas. They have no new ideas about how to govern. They're just still heading towards this horrible dystopia that other people have told them is definitely going to happen, so they may as well create it. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy from the late 60s.
Now we're back at Herman Kahn. Let's try to get our heads around what actually happened with Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum. Have we been? Is what you discovered in your research? Is the whole Klaus Schwab thing and the whole World Economic Forum, has it all been a setup to get us to where we are today? Is he just another puppet rolling out a CIA agenda in the bigger agenda that is called New World Order?
Yeah, I think people are going to start getting used to saying CFR agenda when they talk about this sort of stuff, because really, this has been an agenda that's been rolling for a long time, and it's well mapped out, it's well documented. I mean, if you go into that article and you read every document that's attached, you read all the evidence that I've sourced in there, and I've been meticulous to
I
make
made
sure
a star, but it's quite a bit.
you will be reading and taking stuff in for well over a month, maybe 2 months. There's so much information available to us about the dynamics of politics, and the CFR, they have a long history with controlling and manipulating things, and we know this. And what they said, and this includes what Herman Kahn himself would say in his documents as well, is that the idea that there's been loads of war in Europe, that's been the most disruptive force over the previous 100, 200 years that they had experienced life on Earth. If you're looking at it from a perspective of the mid-1960s, they're looking forward to this technological bright future and looking back at some of the darkest periods of human history. And they've come to the conclusion that's because everybody in Europe is different, they speak different languages, they don't get on, that causes trouble, and they ends up in war. and they've got to form everybody together to be a group. They've got to make a group. They've got to make everybody one. And this Klaus Schwab was a tool, I think, in creating something that seemed simple to us folk right at the start, because it was called originally the European Management Symposium. It was just about European managers managing things in companies. That's all, nothing to worry about. But in actual fact, we know that 2 years later, it was called the European Management Forum, the EMF. And then by the 90s, it was the World Economic Forum. And so it changed in scope, but it already focused on being a World Economic Forum. You know, by the 80s...
From day zero, probably.
Yeah. But Kissinger said in the 80s on stage in the World Economic Forum, this is the year that foreign policy goes global. Because what Herman Kahn said in his documents was basically that disruptive force can only be countered by a very strong Anglo-American union. So a union between Britain and America and all the other English-speaking areas, kind of like the British colony of the past, the colonies of the past, and Europe being a strong unit, but preferably them all being merged into a superstate. That would be the best way to keep peace in the whole of Europe, and then to implant the values that they think we should have, and this is very Orwellian, onto us as shared common values that will assist in keeping peace. So their idea is creating the American-British Empire to take over Europe, so that the Chinese and the Russians have no complaint anymore, have nothing they can say anymore, because it will just be too powerful. And then eventually, and Herman Kahn says this as well, that European Anglo-American union will probably lead to a union of the world.
Yeah. Okay, coming to this conclusion that it's all a larger plan and a setup. I have two more questions. Then I think we should try to round it up. One thing I really don't understand in this whole. Let's stick to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. When you see the man. Acting, the way he dresses, the way he speaks, but also the things he says. There is no covering of things. He says out loud in 2030, "You'll own nothing and you will be happy." He actually speaks about the fourth industrial revolution, changing us human beings. Everybody with half a brain would be terrified about the things he says. Why do you think? Do they say it all out loud?
It's very simple. The process of when you actually learn who Klaus Schwab is, and I met some people. I'm going to be in a documentary film in a couple of months, alongside people like Robert F. Kennedy and other people about the COVID stuff called The Greatest Reset. It's quite an apocalyptic affair. It's a really well made documentary. But the guy who was making it told me he had gone to the World Economic Forum and gone to Davos at one time, and he said they went round there and they don't know how they managed to get in. They just managed to slip in the back door, really. And he said it was bizarre. They all just thought it was normal. They're all walking around like it's the most bizarre scene you would see. For them, they're stuck in this little world. They're stuck in this little bubble, and they don't see outside that bubble at all. And what you discover in time is that to us, they look evil. What they do looks evil. Their actions are evil. So we can only come to the conclusion that they look like these stereotypical Bond villains sitting up on Davos, stroking the cat, and deciding to take over the world. Yeah, like Herman Kahn said, megalomania zoom, as he flings out of the chair and points at the sky, as described in one of the articles. You know, they this position they take, which it seems absurd to us, may not attract us, but we have no power. We have nothing that they want. We have no way to sway society. Even when we go out in the streets, they ignore us, or they beat us up, or they spray water us and tell us that we live in a peaceful society really loudly as they beat us with batons. You know, we know that they're not trying to communicate with us. That show of power, that show of dominance, that show of evil, that show of I can get away with anything, that I will create the world you will live in and you will be happy with it. You will own nothing and you will be happy. That type of attitude is not to spread joy and cheer to us and make us say, yeah, we were on board with that. That sounds brilliant. It's for the other rich people who will never be affected by that, so they can be drawn to power, because all of these people are drawn to the power of control, the power of coercion, the power of manipulation, the power to literally destroy lives based on them having an idea of what humanity is, while taking out what real humanity is completely out of the equation, taking a real human emotional view, a spiritual view of humanity, and just poo-pooing it, dismissing it, putting it to the side, and instead introducing their idea of some form of robotic version of humanity. And that robotic version is always going to come out of the minds of a load of business managers who want to get the most efficiency out of their workers, because it's a robotic mindset. So these guys looking evil, it's not to attract us. No, 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 no. Our anger makes other people in their group say, that's where the power is. Look how all of those people are scared. Look how all those people fear. Look how they can make a policy here and suddenly it happens in 25 countries over here within a matter of days. These guys can do everything. They're the power. Power-hungry people look to be around power-hungry people, and Kissinger and people knew that. That's why they sent over John Kenneth Galbraith, a massive grandee of the American system, and Herman Kahn, one of the biggest geniuses who was allowed to think outside the box morally and ethically, to think the unthinkable. That's why they sent those two over with a group of others as well, with Klaus Schwab, to Europe before the World Economic Forum was created, to convince the elites there this was the way forward. Because look, they can convince each other about that. They didn't try convincing the normal man that they should create this event, because the normal man is not part of their system. The common man is a problem to them, because robots are coming, and we've got all of these useless eaters like me and you, and people who make 150, 200,000 pounds a year nowadays, or dollars a year, or euros a year. They have no future, and they don't realize it. They have no idea they're living in this, oh, I'm in luxury. And their lives, everything that they built is going to be taken away from them. Not only by these men and their robotic natures, but by the robots themselves. You know, by the things that these men are pushing towards creation, fundamentally ignoring all of the warnings. Because one thing that's really important to remember in this, Herman Kahn said quite clearly when he discovered that Klaus Schwab and his gang were introducing the Club of Rome guys with their Malthusian idea of population control to the World Economic Forum in 1973, Herman Kahn was devastated by the idea of population reduction and what that meant. Because he had seen genocide. He knows what genocide looks like. They'd all seen genocide. But Herman Kahn was a genius. He was really a genius. He was an arsehole back when you're watching that interview with Anthony J. Weiner, where he's talking about dystopia. By the time it hit 1973, 1974, he's saying, I don't want to see that world anymore. And he went and wrote The Next 200 Years, which was a much more optimistic view that said we could harness this technology to make humans go all around the universal solar system, galaxies, whatever. We can increase, we can get all of the resources we need, we can live wonderful lives, and we don't need to live in the fear that we created by this idea of all of this technology. But there's warnings, you know, Herman Kahn became a guy who was warning about this Malthusian idea of population control, about this really, about the elite. Some of the things he said in an interview in 1978, 1979, The way he described the elites was to say the common man doesn't want their kids to know about sexual education. They'll try and avoid it through school. They'll try to make sure they're not taught. They'll tell them little bits about themselves, and they'll expect them to work it out themselves when they get old enough. And before then, no, they're not thinking about it. Herman Kahn said the elites go so far as to teach their child to orgasm.
Yeah.
And that was the difference. He claimed himself, Herman Kahn, the genius, himself was the difference between how the common man in society treats their children and the idea of sex, the idea of things. Because these other guys, these elites, they're out of control. They don't know. They think they know everything. They think they've got all the power, and so that means they can do. They can do. And to do the things that they've done in the past, we've seen over and over again. It involves creating technology that will kill millions. It involves implementing that technology into a system that causes us to fear that technology. It involves using that technology against us to murder us. It involves us not being there anymore. And that's where we're going. We're entering into a world where everything we see is the pressure on population over and over. And if people actually went out and did the research and actually looked at how population works, that even by current levels, population will stop about between 9 and 11 billion, and will start to reduce and go back down to 8 billion. With the modern techniques, farming and housing and other things, we could live a life of luxury, all of us. Every single one of us could live a life of abundance, not harm the earth at all, actually protect the earth and live upon the land and be custodians of the land. And it wouldn't be a massive population boom, because when people have what they need and are educated well, they don't have over a certain amount of babies. They kind of keeps to being about 2 people replacing 2 people, replacing 2 people, all down through the generations. Now, what they want is to reduce the amount of people who are giving birth to about 1.5 to 1.29 babies per couple, and that will cause a population crash. And a population crash basically means you have a massive older generation, you've got a very small younger generation. All of those younger generation end up having to look after the older generation all the time, have less children, have less time for children. The next generation is even smaller, and so on and so forth, until you have a complete population crash. And with their ideas of extending life for as long as possible, that even exacerbates that problem even further, that people will stay alive longer, and the population crash means that you will end up seeing around 500 million people living on Earth, which is the exact figure they really want to reach. So if you look at where the future is, where we're going naturally, we're going to drop off and population crash down to only about 8 billion, but it's not really a crash, it's more of a dip, from about 11 billion by about 2070 to 2100. That's all of their own figures from all of the big organizations. But if you follow what their plans, implementing their plans would do, it would cause less births to happen, it would cause a population crash to happen sooner, unnaturally made, that would cause a massive global population crash and would leave them in a situation where they've reduced the population without having to inject people with things or give people viruses or whatever they do, or have wars.
Injections.
Yeah. So listen, it sounds all dark and it sounds all horrible, but if you can see an agenda for what it is, and you can understand how people manipulate ideas to get people to do other things, we've all got to do one thing, one really simple thing, is we've got to look at the evidence. When someone says something to us, we don't take that on automatically. We go and look. And I know we had a little conversation about this beforehand, but, you know, a lot of the beginning of my journey of getting to this point where I can write a long article, which is all completely checkable and is all verifiable and is all sealed off. A lot of that came from me just saying, well, someone's told me something I don't believe, and I've got to check it up, and then checking it up and discovering that within about an hour that the thing I've been told is wrong, and it's provably wrong, and there's all of this evidence. And I remember when I started off that process, I had a fear, and I think it's a fear that everybody has. I think it's a fear that I can talk about here that everybody can connect with. This fear of actually looking for the information and finding out the truth. And deep down, that affects how you feel about your ego and your knowledge, because you're questioning your current knowledge. When you go to pick up new knowledge, you are risking your ego. And it stops most people. They fear the damage that would do. What about the things they said before where the knowledge would be wrong? What would that mean? So they choose not to find out the truth. And that is living in that mask, in that lie. And as that builds up over time.
Is that what is called cognitive dissonance?
Yes. It is amazing. A lot of terms like that are made by some of these people from the past who were some of the cleverest people who manipulated society. Yes. But it's also something else. It's we are really not living lifestyles that are healthy and honest for us. And we all know this, and we're all hiding away from it, and we all distract ourselves by doing things that are really negative. Once upon a time, I used to take loads of drugs, gamble, and act like an asshole every now and again. That everybody does things, and it's not constructive. It's not very good, and it's all of us having an emotional crisis because we're in this state of we don't know hypernormalization. We don't know what's real or not anymore. And we all know that's the reason. And yet we choose not to look at we don't research things because we're scared that will break our worldview. Listen, our worldview is already messed up beyond belief. We're already doomed.
I think our worldview is one big lie.
Yeah, so going to find out the truth can only be beneficial. There is no more hiding away from the truth will make you feel better. It'll only make you feel worse. It'll only make you more controlling. We've got to come out of this idea that we don't go and research and look for ourselves. Even with me, I say, look at my work and then question every part of it. Look at every single detail.
And that brings me to my final question. I've spent the last 2 years thinking and hoping that I could reach people into doing exactly what you just mentioned, motivating people to do some research and some critical thinking. And I came to the conclusion that no matter how many facts, figures, indisputable truth I presented to them, most of the people, I think 98% of the people, just shut their eyes, stick their fingers in their ears and ignore everything that I tell them, show them, or everything that I try to motivate them to do. They just completely ignore it, which makes me quite... let's say
frustrated.
No, not frustrated. It's just that there was a period, let's say that in 2021 I was still quite positive that we could turn this thing around. And that has shifted, and I'm curious about you. What is your idea about the near future? Where is this heading to?
Right. Well, there's two things with that. Like, number one is, you can produce stats galore to people. You can produce all the stats in the world, and you can show them over and over again. And what you don't realize is they'll go away and look at other stats that are a complete lie and not know the difference. They see a graph, it's a graph. And these guys learned, all of these guys who had done the COVID stuff, people like Neil Ferguson and Roy Anderson, were the pioneers of this sort of pandemic modeling. And they were the first people to produce pandemic computer modeling to the public in a scenario during the foot and mouth disease outbreak. They know how to use these things. And when we try and use the same things against them, they'll just produce other things where they've split them up, broke them up, put a little disclaimer at the bottom, a little couple of notes here and a couple of notes there that make you completely obscure the facts and leave you not knowing anything anyway. So using that method of stat against stat, I think I've only think this over the past 2 years from seeing it over and over. It does not seem to have so much of an effect as something where you can describe somebody a story that they can understand, a tale that they can understand. And for that, you need characters and you need context. But also you need to choose, and this is more important than anything. What I say just on the last bit is that stats don't include character and context. Stats are very much manipulative they're able to be manipulated. But basically, people, you have to choose your fights and your battles carefully. You can't go round using the same technique on everybody to get them to listen to a little bit of truth. It seems mad that you have to use a technique to get someone to open up their eyes. And what often happens is we become obsessed by this idea that someone won't listen to us, someone won't hear us. So what we do is the ones who will never reach, we get obsessed with, and then we just put all our pressure. We go to our family members who we're emotionally involved with, we've got loads of history with, we're to some really close friends who you've got loads of things that have happened in the past that mean they don't trust you about this, or they think you're too much about that, and you've got lots of history. You're not going to win those battles easily. You talk to people all around the place, and you will discover the people who will turn around and say, oh, wait a minute, actually, can you tell me more? Mm-hmm. Because they will ask the questions. Once they know you have a knowledge of something, you don't even have to force it upon them. They will ask their own questions eventually, because you're a nice person who's being nice to them and you're not telling them lies, and they can always go away and check it, including like verifiable facts. Sometimes if I'm in the park or something, someone's saying something is wrong, I'm saying, I can prove that to you wrong in 2 seconds with a simple search on your own, like, beloved Google platforms and stuff. and I do. I quickly think, and I show them something, and they go away, and then they use. I had a girl in the park the other day who said, oh, you know, that thing you told me the other day, I started showing other people it. I've been going, look what I know. And you know, people, what you have to realize is that you aren't going to communicate with those people who hate listening to you because of who you are. But those same people listen to the pretty girl in the park. Those same people flip over straight away when another member of their family says, oh no, this is crap. And those people who are willing to listen are the recruits. And it will grow and it will grow and it will grow the more we talk to people. And I'm not just talking online. I'm talking, what I do is I talk to every single person I can, and I make friends with them. I make friends with them on an acquaintance level, social level. I interact with them. I have lovely conversations. I know what their family names are. Every now and again I can do a nice thing for them. And I do that because I love them and I want them to be happy. And I show them that so that when I'm literally saying, I care about your well-being and this is worrying me, they say, oh, thanks, I'll have a look. Instead of being, oh, I don't want to hear anything, I don't want to know anything, I don't, you know, they realize it comes from a place from someone who loves people, mm-hmm. who only gives out love, who goes around being kind all of the time. And that is no different with my work. I try and make it so focused and so evidence-based that I don't have to prove things to people. It proves itself. And all you have to do is get one person to read the truth once, and then they can never see the lie the same again. You know, Correct. They will never be able to look at it and see it as the truth. Correct. So you just got to open up. And people don't even realize it's not even the subjects you're obsessed on. Get away from it. If it causes someone to be turned off in having a conversation, then you're not doing it right. You need to have a conversation. If you want to talk with people and have a backwards forward, you can't talk about things they're not ready to talk about. But there are plenty of things to talk about that they are ready to talk about, and will open up their eyes in a way that will allow them to see the other stuff as not so scary to tackle in a conversation amongst friends. And to create that, last one is you have to be friends.
And then the second part of the question?
Oh, God,
where are we heading to? And I would like to ask you to try to keep it within a minute. Yeah. Not only because I have to subtitle this whole thing and it's a shitload of work.
yeah. I'm sorry about that.
No. Never mind. I'm enjoying every second. So
I tell you, I can't predict the future, but I can predict that these guys will manipulate society in a way that will cause us to always be on the back foot, always be on the defensive, always be trying to change something that is already been conquered, and win a battle that's already been won by them on the battlefield. We've got to choose our battles properly, and we've got to start refusing to accept lies only accept the truth, and talk to people properly, because all of these things out there only work, all these dynamics only work because of the fear they're creating. And I think their fear is falling apart because they can't make everybody a globalist. They can't make everybody obey to their ideas, and their ideas work upon everybody obeying. So that's not going to happen. But I think we're entering into a time where we're going to see about maybe 4 or 5 different technologies which are really going to question what it is to be human, make us put us on in a dangerous position, in the same way nuclear and atomic weapons did. So I see there's things that we don't see in the very near future that all of these guys know is going to happen, is why you're seeing a lot of activity at the moment. And all the things you see in activity, those are mainly the distractions that they're doing to make something else happen, for preparation for something else to happen for the time when the thing happens. And what we're seeing is the breakdown of the old money world financial system and a new world financial system rise in its place. Yeah. That's what we've got to be looking at. That's what's coming in the very near future. Okay.
Mr. Johnny Vedmore, I enjoyed this conversation with all my heart. We came to speak about, we intended to speak about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, but we touched on a lot of other subjects. Yeah. And I have the feeling that we will be speaking to each other again and go into those subjects a bit deeper. I love talking to you here, and the format, the way you as a character. I like it all, and also I really want to be able to have access to the European audience, because there is a lot that is blocked. I worked that out recently when I went to Chile, and I tried to show a taxi driver all my music on YouTube, and I have music that's actually like up through a music label, and it doesn't appear on YouTube in Chile. So we're all becoming these. They're talking about globalism. Everything's going to be the same. At the same time, all the nation states are crushing their own people, and we've all got to work together. Same over here, over there. I have loved talking with you, and I would love to come back anytime, my friend. Thank you. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much. Awesome. Brilliant.